The development of 2011 car is finished, and you, as a chief designer, are completely devoted to the project of the new car. Can you tell us where we are with it?
Yes, that's correct. We are currently in the phase of finalizing the main components of the car. We've obviously decided the fundamental layout of the car, the basic dimensions, the basic positioning of components, and we are some of the big pieces that need a very long production time, for example the chassis and the gearbox, are already in production, and other pieces with fairly long lead times, for example suspension and some internals, are also in the final stage of design. That is where we are production-wise. Of course, there's the big program of the car, which is, as always, the aerodynamics, is obviously ongoing. It has been going on for a few months, and it's got obviously a lot more work to do in order to finalize all the aerodynamic configuration of the car.
There are still 5 races to do. What can be done during these races which can be helpful for next year?
In terms of mentality or philosophy, we're trying to do everything that gives us the best possible chance for next year. So most of our work also for this year's car has some element of extrapolation for next year. For example, we will be testing some new components, for example the front wing in the next few races, which changes our front wing approach, how we design that area of the car, and we feel we're going to learn quite a lot of useful things for next year as well. Of course that will hopefully also benefit this year's car, but the main approach is that we want to give the maximum for next year.
It's usual to say that when the regulations don't change too much, it's more difficult to close the gap to the cars in front. Do you think this is the situation we are going to face this year?
No, I don't quite agree. I don't agree on two fronts. One is that the regulations are not really that stable as people may perceive, because the elimination of the exhaust, or in any case the complete change of the exhaust regulations, is affecting one of the key areas of development of this year's cars. So therefore, having a different exhaust regulation is a major rule, not a minor detail. That said, okay, I have to accept also the rest of the car rules are staying fundamentally unchanged, and therefore, as I said before, a lot of things are applicable to next year. I think that when you have a stable set of rules or relatively clear areas where you can act on and others where you can't, I think it's a bit easier to evaluate where your opponents can be and to give yourself hard, ambitious, but also accurate targets of what performance you need to achieve. So we've set ourselves these performance targets, and I think we are on line to achieve them.
You mentioned the exhaust. Is there something that we have learned during this year which can be helpful for the future?
Yes, I think in two ways. One is the exhaust effect itself from an aerodynamic point of view was a very powerful one, and having now had it banned, or in any case changed massively, we still need to see is there any way that we can achieve similar effects and so on. So we have learned from the process, and we are trying to see how to minimize the effect of having changed the rule. Secondly, philosophically or from an approach point of view, the fact that we missed or we were late in the development of these concepts compared to our main opponents is also something that has, I think, been useful as a lesson, because it's an area where opponents made a big step and they gained huge advantage out of it in the early part of the season and remained ahead during the remaining part of the season. So clearly, if we had managed to be the first ones to step on that boat in the early part, we perhaps would have managed to have a much better season. So the reasons why we didn't quite managed to succeed in that respect is something that we have analyzed and we're trying to change in the future so we avoid similar bad surprises.
You mentioned the word approach. We talk a lot about a new approach, a new mentality in designing the car. Can you give some practical example of what does it mean exactly?
I think I can give two main examples. One is the relation of the aerodynamics to the rest of the car, to other areas of the car which are quite challenging to achieve but have an aerodynamic influence. I'm talking about the structures of the suspension of the chassis and so on. All of these areas have been put in question, and we've been developing a lot of these areas with the main purpose to benefit the car's aerodynamics. That has made the structural work a lot more complicated this year compared to previous years, but we feel it will have ultimately a very big benefit for the car's performance. So we've been a lot less conservative on some of the structural considerations of the car in order to give a much freer hand to the aerodynamics department to develop the best possible shapes and aero performance. Secondly, within the aero department, we have decided to spend a much bigger proportion of our time also testing new concepts and bigger ideas rather than a small optimization of components. And this clearly sometimes may fail because we may have some idea that doesn't work, but I think it has also opened our horizons a bit, and that's paying better.
In a recent interview, Stefano Domenicali said that when he saw for the first time the model of the new car, he said, wow, you saw this model growing up day by day. Do you share the same view as Stefano?
I think it's very visually quite different to the previous cars, and I guess I can understand his reaction. Our objective there is not to just develop pretty shapes or different shapes, but hopefully to get him to say wow at the results rather than the shapes. That's our objective.